Lojas, I am Igor Alcantara, and here I am for one more video about how to do cool statistical stuff in Qlik. And this video came based on a question a few people asked me. So I helped them, and then I thought, well, I think this will be a cool video. And the topic of today is how to create trend and forecasting lines manually in Qlik. Let's see how the formula works, etc., because that will give you a little bit of more control. So let's get started. So let's take a look at the data that I have prepared for today's video. So this is a very simple data of production demand. So basically I have the days of production, 1, 2, 24, and then I have units that are in demand for production for each single day. So this is the data that I have. This is the data that I know. I don't need to forecast this data because I already know the information. What I need is to forecast the data to the future. So then I created a very simple logic here just for the purpose of this demo, so I can add extra dates for the future. So I define in this variable v future days, how many days in the future I want. So I put a 21 with using the peak function here. I got what is the last day in my calendar. So that will return me, in this case, 24. That's the last day. And then using auto generate, basically I concatenating, adding more rows to the original table, adding all of those extra 21 days. So from day 1 to 24, we have the actual data. And from day 25th to the end of the table, I have future data. And I've created a flag to identify this, which is called future flag. So for the future data, it's set to 1. For the current, or let's say not future data, it's set to 0. Pretty simple. Now, if you are in Qlik Cloud, you have an interesting feature that is not available if you are in Qlik on-prem client managed. But so I'll show you if you are both in cloud or client managed, how you can do it. But let's start with the beginning. Let me show different techniques how we can do this. So this is the chart basically representing for each day how many units I have. And of course, all the way to 24, I do have data. So that's my line. And for the future, days 25th to the end, I do not have any units. I just have the days. So that's why the line drops to 0. It doesn't look cool. I don't want the zeros. So let's go to the chart properties, and I'll go to add-on, data handling, and let's remove include 0 values. There we go. So now we have only the valid dates. Okay, only the non-future because they are non-zero. Pretty good. Now I want to project forecasting. And this only works if you are in Qlik Cloud. So let me go to data and let's find the measure, which is actual. It's a very simple calculation, just sum of units. And for that one, I want to come here, scroll down, and turn on forecast. But sometimes people come here and they say, well, I don't see this option. What happens? Do I get an older version of Cloud? No, we're all in the same version. What happens is the x-axis has to be in continuous scale. To make sure of that, you need to go to Appearance, x-axis, and then make sure this checkbox is checked. So by default, you'll find something this like auto. So uncheck, make sure this is continuous. So then we come here to our measure, and now we will turn on forecast. Very good. So in the forecast, we have basically two methods. You can either set to be an SSA, which is single spectrum analysis, or you can set it to be OLS, which is ordinary least squares. So SSA, it's a more powerful tool because it uses time series decomposition. So basically, it will decompose that forecasting into trend, seasonality, and noise. We can also add some confidence interval here. we added the default 95% confidence interval. So this shadow will represent like the best case scenario, worst case scenario for our forecasting. SSA is only good for a short-term forecast. That's why we only see for only a few days. Okay, but let's say you're not on cloud, you're on client manage. You don't have this forecast option here. So what do we do? Can we mathematically represent SSA in Qlik? Well, possible it is, but it's so complex. This is such a complex algorithm that would be super slow. So let's say not really. How about the OLS? Can we set that up? Can we work the math behind it? Yes, but ordinary least squares is a very simple method of forecasting. Well, ordinary means is the most basic one, like non-weighted linear regression. And I mean, least square basically it says that it minimizes the square of residuals, which is the error. But anyway, too much technical talking. Let's not get that to that direction. So technically, yes, but it's not a pretty good one. And I'll show you some alternatives. So let's keep this back in here. So another option is to use, for example, Fourier Transform. So Fourier Transform, it's a mathematical methodology that we can use to separate what is signal to what is noise, and we can use that for forecasting. So we can identify trends, and etc. And by doing that, you have like a very powerful tool. So let's talk about Fourier. Not really, because I already did. I have a video on our YouTube channel, which is also an article in our blog. So you go datavoyages.net, you'll find it there, or in our YouTube channel, about how to do Fourier Transform in Qlik. Basically, that's the code that I showed when I demoed this. For our example here, the code will be something like this. So I'm not going to talk about it because I already did. So I'll put the link in the description if you want to take a look at it. Now, what I want to show you is another methodology. So then I'll give you options. So what I will show you, it's something more like this. So you have your actual line, then it connects to a trend line, and we have an best case scenario, worst case scenario, and I'll help you with the math behind it. And this will work regardless if you're in Qlik Cloud, if you in Qlik Client Manage, or I mean, who am I to judge? Even in Qlik View, will work in all scenarios. All right. So let's get started. Now, let me go to a new sheet where we can work. And let me edit, and I'll just drop a line chart. Let me make this big. And let's get started with the basic. Let me add just the actuals. So my dimension is day, and my measure, in that case, it's basically sum of units, at least for now. Okay, so that's what we saw so far. All right. However, I cannot, in this case, simply go to add-on zeta handling and include zeros because it will work here, but then it will affect our further calculation for the rest of the things we were doing. So instead, I need to work. We can still keep this here, and we'll see. We can work this later. But then I'll make sure we only show this for not the future data. So where the future flag is equal to 0. So I could do basically a set analysis in here. But let's. So a basic set analysis where future flag is equals to 0. There we go. And if I go back here, data handling, and bring back include zeros, this will still work. All right, so that's our actual line. So let's call this actual. Now it's time to add our trend. And for the trend, I will do a rolling average, but I'll do a rolling average based on the data that I have for the past, the one all the way to 24. So let's click Add Measure, FX, and let me paste the expression. We'll copy and paste the expression, will save us time instead of simply typing them. So what I'm doing here is basically taking that original expression, but getting the previous rows through the function above, starting the current row, going back 14 days, so we get like a range of 2 weeks, for example. So that will give me a list of different sum of units, and then I calculate the average of that. So that's the rolling average. And I can apply that, and I'll call this a trend, and let's see what happens. Not exactly what I expected. Look at the trend. First of all, the trend starts in day 1, which is not what I wanted. I don't want the trend for the existing data, which is not a bad idea, by the way, because you can see what is actually happening. Are we going up, down? Are we like static? Because sometimes the curves goes up and down, up and down. It's hard to see any actual pattern. So it's useful, but that's not what I wanted here. I wanted a trend only to be applied to the future. But then, can I then simply use a set analysis here? Well, actually, set analysis will not work for this case, because then set analysis, let's say I'm going to do set analysis where the future flag is equal 1, so then will be days 25 into the future. However, if I do that, I'll be evaluating row by row, and I want to evaluate like previous rows. So the above would not work pretty well. And secondly, I want this part to be evaluated for the rows in the past, and this part to evaluate the rows in the future, actually in the past, but then the whole thing only show in the rows to the future. So there is a few limitations here where the set analysis will not work. So we'll do something that I only do in worst case scenario, which is using the if statement. So let me paste then the alternative for that, which is an if statement. So it's a similar expression, but encapsulated inside an if statement. So if future flag is 1, then I'll do my calculation, which is still a range average. I'm doing above total. And look at this. I'm doing another if statement here inside because I want to use for my above function only the data from the past, but I want to show this only in the data for the future. So I have to do a couple of if statement. And inside of here, instead of using the 14 days, I'm using the variable that defines how many future days I want to have, which right now is set to 21. So once I apply this, and don't worry about pausing this video and copying the expression. In the datavoyages.net article about this, and the link is in the video and everything, I will paste every single expression. All right. So let's hit apply, and voila, that's what we have. So we have then the trend going to the future. But have you noticed something? Our line now, because we had days in the future, our actual line then goes and drop to 0, which is pretty not what we wanted to show. So we can go to add-on data handling and remove include zeros, but it doesn't work. Wow, why? Why it doesn't work? Well, because this is 0 for this expression, but not for the other ones. So day 25 going forward is 0 for the actual, but not for the trend. So this will not work. So we need to work our actual expression as well. So we need, again, to change this to an if statement. So in that case, if statement it's a good solution. Pretty good, pretty good. Now let's work a little bit in the trend so we can come here um, and then we can add some styling. So I can come here and let's say I can make this a little thicker. I can make this dash, for example. I can change this to monotone. Some optional options that we have in the properties and pretty good. Now I need to add two more expressions. What is my upper bound and my lower bound? And how do I do it? So what I need to do right now is basically use confidence interval and see, okay, this is like this the middle line in the probability line for my trend based on the rolling average. However, not necessarily the data will look like this because things might happen. So I need some room for error. So what is my best case scenario? Everything goes better than expected. And what are my worst case scenario? How do I know? We have a powerful tool to help us identify this, which is statistics. So I'm going to use the theorem of normal distribution to identify this. So I'm not going to give a lot of details about that because I do have a video where I call about distributions, how to work with distributions in Qlik. I'll also post the link here. It's an older video, but it's still pretty valid, where I explain this theorem. And based on that, a normal distribution, which is I'm assuming here, normal distribution gives you the probability of finding certain values. So long story short, there is like a formula. You need to calculate a z-score. Not going into that. I'll give you the formula in Qlik directly. But basically what we want to do, there was something called z-score. Basically, it's how many, in very simple terms, is how many standard deviations from the mean a certain value is in the distribution. So if I'm talking about units, how much is 200? Let's say, well, 200 is one standard deviation above the mean or one standard deviation below the mean, things like that. Based on that, we can calculate this. So I talk a lot about this already. Let's go to the formula. Let me show you the formula first for the upper bound, and then I'll explain the logic behind it. All right. So let me go create a new expression. Let me paste this. Let me put this plus right here so it will be more visible. There we go. So we're doing basically the same we did before. So this is basically the trend, right? But I'm adding, like, I want to add some margin of error to that in the upper level. Like, and that's the formula. So I will do plus 1.96 times this. And times this is basically the same thing here with one exception. I'm calculating the standard deviation. So the formula is the average plus the z-score times standard deviation. That's the formula. So that's the z-score that I've calculated, and that's the standard deviation. So it's basically the same formula, but instead of calculating the average of the above, I'm calling the standard deviation, which is a measure of variance, or square variance, technically speaking. Okay, now that's the formula. Why 1.96? Why? Well, let me show you. Let me click apply. You see the upper line here. We'll work with that in a minute. But basically, let me go back to the script editor and let me show you this. The z-score in that case is defined based on how confident I am or I want to be. What is my confident level? So the default that people usually use is 95%. So 95%, if you want a confidence level of 95%, which means 95% of the time, if I take samples of this, 95% of the time, this is the number that I'm expecting. There will be between this range, between this and that. Let's say we're talking about an election poll, and you say, well, we did this little poll, and we think this candidate will have 20% of votes with margin of error of 3% with 95% confidence level. So what that means is And 95% of the time, if you do the research, that the number of votes for that candidate will be 20%, vary in 3% plus and minus. So that vote will be between 70% and 23%, 95% of the time. So that's basically what its confidence level is. Um, and the z-score for that is 1.96. Beautiful math around. Check my distribution video to learn more, but I think I'm not going to explain this because then this video will be like an hour long. So that's basically it. If you want to do, and I place this in the comments, if you want to do 80%, then your z-score is lower. What it means, confidence level 80%. So you're less confident. So you want to less confidence. So your range, your margin of error in that case will be slower because you're accepting more error than if you're 95%. But let's say you want to be 99% confidence level. That means your z-score goes higher. So your range, because you want to be so confident, we need to extend your range. In that case, 95% is a pretty good number. It's kind of default for a lot of things. So that means our z-score will vary between minus 196 and plus 196. So we're doing the upper bound, so we're doing plus 196. So that's what we are doing right now in here. Okay? And I'll make sure to copy this because I'll use a very similar version for the lower bound. So let's call this upper, or best case scenario. Let's call this upper, for example. We can do the also the dash and etc. But let's not waste our time right now. Let's go to the lower bound. So it's another expression, and in that case, instead of plus, it's minus. That's it. That's it. And then I have the lower bound, and then I'll come here and I'll, let's say, type lower, and then I have what I want, right? Okay, this works. This is what we have, what you want. But however, there was a small difference to what I showed you before, which was my trend line was connected to my actual line. And they are not, because my actual line goes all the way to day 24 and my trend starts in 25th. So there is no link. And there are two separate metrics as well. So for that, I need to do a little workaround. And that workaround, let's go to trend, happens in the trend expression. Basically, what I want to do is, well, you know what? In order to the trend to start on the 24, I need to add the 24 data. And the 24 data, the day 24, which is the last day, I'm just saying 24 because what I have here is the actual data. It's not any projection or forecast or rolling average or anything like that. So I have an if statement here. If future flag is equal 1 does this. And I can do then an else. I can do an else, which would be something like this. So if not, then I can basically place that calculation for the actual with one exception, only for the last day. So my if also have either day equals the variable last day that I show you to in the script, which now it's equal to 24. So if we add that, then we add in day 24 to the trend. Now they look connected. Okay, so that's basically a way doing rolling average with upper and lower limits in Qlik. I hope you like this video. If you do, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our page, and follow and subscribe to our podcast. We have a podcast, Data Voyager's podcast, talk about data. It's pretty cool. So make sure also to follow and subscribe. And go to datavoyagers.net where we have everything that we do there, including our store, pretty cool stickers, t-shirts, all about data for everybody. All right. See you next time. Goodbye.